Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to Their Voices Matter. This series was created to amplify the voices that don't get heard often. So, for the month of January, we are focusing on parents. We're focusing on their experiences and their journeys through the special education process. So, I am so excited for this series. It's something that I wanted to do last year, but you know, it is what it is. Things happen when they're supposed to happen. So I'm so excited to have our first guest on. So I'm going to bring her on in just a minute. I just want to also share, if you are catching this on the replay, please put hashtag replay in the comments so that we know that you are viewing this on the replay. So without further ado, let me welcome my first guest, Miss Katie Fullwood. Hold on, let me make sure she's in. Hello.
Hey,
Hey. So, can you tell the audience who you are, where you are from, and what do you do?
hi, I'm Katie Fullwood. I am finishing my Master's of Social Work degree this May, so I'm class of 2023. I've been working in the social work field with community members who have suffered from substance use disorder and major mental health diagnoses for the past 6 years. Prior to that, I've worked in long-term care. I'm a longtime advocate of people who are vulnerable in my community. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I currently reside in Laurel, Maryland, where I have done a number of different social work positions and am currently working on resource development and allocation of funds for social workers in the Laurel, Maryland area.
Oh, awesome, and thank you so much for telling us where you are. So, in DC, what part of DC is that? Where are you from?
I'm from Southeast DC. I am east of the river, baby. My family is a third third generation Washingtonian who have remained fixtures in the Washington D.C. metro area. So one of the more interesting things about that is that due to redlining, a lot of the places where we resided were subject to we were there because we weren't allowed to purchase property in other places. And what I found and what I've made my ethos for my social work engagement is that even in those horrific circumstances, we have been able to build support networks and community-based outreach and do grassroots level community-based social work because we have found ways to build communities even when we are experiencing disparaging treatment.
All right, awesome. That is awesome. So let's get started. But also, I just want to thank you so much for showing your interest in this series. I appreciate it. Um,
Absolutely.
the first question that I want to ask is, how did your special education journey begin?
So I have three exceptional scholars. All three of them get extra support in educational settings. My eldest had a 504 plan initially, and we ended up getting an IEP because she has a ASD diagnosis. So I started with just recognizing that she had an amazing brain and an amazing method of processing her environment, but that processing was completely different from a lot of her peers, and just making sure that she had the tools to be successful academically. I did the same thing with her younger siblings, just recognizing that there were challenges that they experienced that might present barriers in a traditional educational setting, but always from a strength-based perspective. They have a diverse way of looking at this. So how do I ensure that that diversity is used as a tool and a strength so that they are able to achieve academically anything that they want?
So does your you said her younger siblings, do they have a ASD diagnosis too? And for those who are not sure what ASD diagnosis, ASD is autistic spectrum disorder. Yes, autistic spectrum disorder. Excuse me, I'm
Mhm.
thinking of something else. Do they have autism as well, or is it a different diagnosis that your younger children have?
So my oldest has autism spectrum diagnosis. She also has a pretty severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder and OCD, which is why she had the 504 plan to really address some of the more disruptive behaviors due to those diagnoses, and so that the staff at the school had tools to be able to help redirect that. The sibling directly under her has an autism diagnosis. He also has selective mutism, which, when under extreme amounts of stress or strain, his ability to verbally communicate is stifled. We had to work with staff pretty intensely on ensuring that that they accepted whatever communication he was able to provide, and then encourage him to seek out other methods of communication. My youngest, who's a baby, he's probably he's like the first generation of pandemic babies because he's 4. He lost his hearing during the pandemic, and we were able to do some surgical interventions in order to restore some of the hearing. He is considered nonverbal, so that is a developmental delay. So we started him in early interventions when he was 2, but of course during the pandemic, most of that engagement was not where someone came out to his daycare center. They were working with me via Zoom. And now he is in an early childhood center that is a feeding place for children whose parents want them to matriculate from early interventions into a formal classroom setting. So he does his 3-year-old classes 4 days a week with 3, I think it's a teacher, 2 paraprofessionals. They also have a lot of SPED services like OT, PT, speech, on music therapy on site. So he's able to engage with those different specialties through the school system.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you have done a lot and been through a lot. I can and just from, me working in the school system, I know that can be overwhelming for a parent when you're not familiar with it. So, what has been like the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome, or even if you haven't overcome it yet, like what has been the biggest hurdle for you with attaining supports for your children and just going through this process with them?
So there are a couple of things. The first and foremost is that initial IEP. That initial IEP was there were tears
For all of them, or just for your
for
oldest?
for definitely for the older 2. Early interventions did a really good job of using the monthly appointments that we were having to build my youngest son's initial IEP. So they had already had all of the background information and things like that, so we didn't have to go back and kind of rethink. My eldest, my daughter, hers was not as challenging because she had the 504 plan. So a lot of that information had already been, there had already been exchanges with providers, and she is a medically complex person. So she's always gone into formal school settings with a literal binder's worth of medical data that needed to be on file in case of emergency. So that one was more, it was tedious, but it wasn't as difficult. My middle son, everybody ended up in tears at some point. And it was for a lot of reasons. We have a really good network of public charter schools in Washington, D.C. And in the charter school setting, one of the things that we have always appreciated is that they have the ability to accommodate certain behaviors as long as it doesn't take away from instruction in the class. So when he came to that school, there were parent interviews as well as scholar interviews so that the instructors were able to learn more about the kid. The kid was able to talk about their preferences, and then the parents would kind of explain what type of learner they are, what type of motivating factors do they utilize at home. So he did not actually get an IEP until the pandemic, because without having the face-to-face engagement, without, like, we had to understand what was going on in the Zoom learning that we were missing. That initial IEP took 57 hours over the course of 4 days.
That's for me. I've never heard of one that long.
And the only reason why I know is because we did it with him. His initial, the interviews and the testing with the educational psychologist all happened at home via Zoom. As a family, we had to find a way to set up a test ready area for him, and we had to be radio silent while he was testing, or they could dispute the results. So imagine having a toddler and a puppy in the house during a pandemic while we are doing a formal test. We had to work with the educational psychologist on finding clips on YouTube so when he could do a break so that she could observe some of his behaviors. Because of the selective mutism, him communicating with the educational psychologist became very difficult. And then there's the other side where the educational psychologist wanted to meet with me and my ex-husband, and we discussed everything from the birth to the pregnancy to the social factors that led to the divorce, his responses to the divorce, his engagement with mental health providers and what that looks like and what that sounds like, trying to track down doctors in the middle of a pandemic and get things scanned and emailed when, doctors normally are like, I'll send you a fax or I can fax it over, and recognizing that could only be done in a 5 day, like she only had 5 days in DC. When you open an IEP, if it's not closed within 5 days, you have to start it all over again. So it was very stressful. It was very triggering. I was not expecting to have to discuss things like my divorce, which still had emotions on both sides of the table connected to it. I am thankful that we tolerated the distress of going through that in the middle of a pandemic, but I would definitely say, I would advise people going forward, whatever medical records or things like that you have available, have that ready beforehand, and have those releases of information for providers ready beforehand, and deep read through it. It was a lot to kind of go through. He now has services in school for both the educational aspect, but also psychosocial development, which we've really appreciated. But it was a difficult journey to get his initial IEP done.
Wow. And I think that was a lot. And I think when parents go through that special education process, I think they're under the impression, oh, you're just going to focus on my kid. And it's like, no, they want to get a full picture when they do that social history. What type of home is this kid coming from? Oh, are you married? Are you not married? Oh, were you ever together? Did y'all ever live together? Oh, was it a divorce? Was it nasty? Was it good? And it's not to, get in your business, but that may have affected your child in some way. And we need to know, okay, if it did affect the child in some way, what support do we need to put in place for this child if it is, impeding education? And sometimes parents are like, what? Why are you asking me that? And all forth and so on. Did you experience that, or did you have those type of feelings?
I was shocked that they document, so they went 3 generations back. And I think of course, being from the social work field, if I had known this beforehand, I would have just done a genogram and sent that to her rather than having to like disclose it in a meeting, because it did cause some awkward communication between me and my ex-husband. But they went 3 generations back, so there were things that I didn't think about disclosing that I ended up disclosing. Like, my mom had an IEP. I had an IEP. His dad and his sister, my eldest child, all have a genetic predisposition for a disease, and they're being followed by, specialists in that field. I never would have thought that in the course of ensuring that he wasn't going to fail 7th grade math, that I was going to have to think about, so why did my mom have an IEP, and what year do I remember starting special ed, and what did my special ed look like? Like, I've never I never thought that would be something that I would have to disclose. I think that I'm so thankful, though, that we are in a place in this family and in my life where like stigma and bias do not cloud our ability to communicate transparently. There was a lot of work around addressing stigma and bias on a personal level, but also on a familial level, that prevented some of the embarrassment to bubble up in the course of this communication. But it was very triggering, to say the least, to have to sit back and think like, now, when did I file for divorce? Like, I don't, like, that was a lot. And like, I got married again, but I mean, he here, like, he's in, and then like to talk about like their sibling and like how there's, it was a lot more in depth than I expected.
Yes, it is like, and then sometimes I think, parents are just like, well, again, why do you need to know that? And then also like they may expect a certain type of a certain level of I'll say empathy and grace from a psychologist, and it's like they're trying to get through the report. They want to get the report done. Not that they don't care about what you're saying. They got to get through this report so they can get the IEP on time. So then they move on to the next kid. So I know that can be taken in a certain light as well, and it's not intentional. Did you feel that as well? Like, do you not care about my feelings? Or, oh my God, you're like, there's no emotion here. Like, you have no sympathy or anything like that?
I definitely felt that. Initially, I processed it as, okay, this is the pandemic. I can't imagine on her end trying to engage with a kid on Zoom who we know has a diagnosis that prevents them from talking. It was difficult because there were things about, there were behaviors that we had to discuss as adults that I now know how destructive they are, that, I have processed with my family and with providers, that I was not expecting to just be able to casually disclose to someone that I don't know. Right. When you are ending a marriage, there's always going to be residual emotions attached to certain situations and certain feelings. And to have those need to be disclosed without an emotional context, I think both for my ex-husband and I did cause a considerable amount of so what do you mean? Like, what do you, I mean, it happened, but like, how does this affect things? And like, are you going to call people on us because this is years ago and like we have dealt with this? And so what I can say is, thankfully, me and him were in a better place where we are able to functionally co-parent. And when I say functionally co-parent, I mean our words and our actions are definitely geared towards ensuring we're supporting our children. But I think one of the things that we have had to develop is a method of supporting each other while we are supporting the children, because that parenting aspect, when it's just you, can be very difficult. So there were moments where he could see my facial expression change, or he saw, my eye roll that I intended to be internal, be a little external, and he would, you know, text me on Google Chat, like, just breathe through it. I felt it too. If he didn't feel like he was the right person to support me in that moment, he would like text my mom and be like, hey, we're in the middle of this IEP. There's a lot going on. You might want to check in like 10, 15 minutes. Cause I don't, I'm sure that there's a lot there. And vice versa. Like, I was able to reach into his network and be like, just check in on him. We had to talk about some things, and that's a lot. And I definitely did not expect that to be something that we would that would be needed. But it was definitely needed and appreciated.
Okay. So now that you've gone through that, and you've gone through that 3 times, with your 3 children, what advice would you give parents who may be getting ready to embark on this journey and embark on this IEP process? What advice would you give them?
Sign our releases of information. Sign them first. Like, sign a release. Like, even if you go to your doctor's office and just put the school's name on it and put like any or their designee, like, do that type of legwork on the outside. It makes it so much easier for the person doing the IEP. It makes it so much easier for you, because I don't know about none of y'all, but you asked me about a pregnancy that I had in the early 2000s. And I was like, but was I there? Like, I don't know. Like, when he talked at some point in 2010, I'm sure, because I would have remembered if he didn't. But like, they literally wanted information like, when did he say his first word? When did he, like, well, for my middle son, do you remember when he started using sentences? Do you remember when he walked? And I'm like, no, no, I know it happened, but those were things that I had not thought that I would need to know. And going back to and just having the pediatrician provide clinical notes would have been so much easier than me having to sit down and like pull out my phone and open Facebook and like, well, here's a picture of him walking. And this is like May of the second year. So I'm assuming it was like Marchish because he's doing okay, because I don't remember none of that. I also think that having a really honest conversation with your child about what's going to happen and what this means and what this doesn't mean can really help with them not allowing their fear of the unknown and the stigma and bias that permeates conversations about what SPED services are and what they aren't to have them unintentionally impede the process. Like me, and especially the older kids, the 4-year-old is just kind of all over the place, but the older kids had a real conversation about, so what does it mean to have special education services and what does it not mean? What, and that, we aren't going to allow other people's stigmatizing attitudes and other people's biases against those who live in diversity to impede our ability to succeed. And one of the things that I think that I did well is I was very transparent with them about what SPED services looks like now as opposed to what SPED services looked like when I was in school.
Very different.
It was very different. There was a significant amount of unchecked bias against children who were seeking SPED services. And that was not just by their peers, that was also by staff members.
Absolutely.
There were people who, when I would tell them I wanted to be a lawyer, they would visibly give me the side eye, like, how are you going to be a lawyer and you can't read to comprehend? And I'm just like, I could learn, I think. Like, isn't that why I'm here? So I could figure this out. So, and I was very honest with them about, by the time I had gotten to high school, I was so tired of feeling like I was battling my peers and battling the professionals that were supposed to be there to help me, that I stopped utilizing my SPED services. And it is evident in the grades that I got. So I did okay in high school. I did okay-ish in college, but it definitely, if I had had the support that I had needed, and if I had not internalized that bias and that stigma, I could have done so much better in undergrad, and I would have already done all of these things that I am now brave enough to do now with special, with disability services on board for the assistance, because I wouldn't have had that period where I really struggled. I really struggled in high school. I really struggled in college to get through material that now with a support I've been able to do well. So I would definitely say having those conversations, especially if your kids are older, and just really beating the mantra that, like, we do not have to accept stigma, we do not have to embody stigma, we do not have to accept bias. Like, folks can have their opinion, but your capability, and this is one of the ways that you teach the world how to accommodate you. The world is so ready to meet you, and this is how you teach them how to appreciate all of the gifts that you have.
Absolutely. I love that. Do you have any advice for, like, during the IEP process and that initial IEP meeting? Do you have any advice for parents?
So have water ready. Take some deep breaths beforehand. I would also say one of the things that has happened going forward that I wish I had advocated for in the beginning is to have a breakdown of what we were going to talk about and when. Just so I knew what to expect, so that I could be prepared to, like, have that information, readily available, or to have requested that information. And also so I can emotionally prepare for, so I'm gonna have to talk about this divorce that I have put out of my mind for 5 years. And, so I would definitely say, if they're saying, so we are doing an IEP, asking them to provide, so who's going to be on this IEP? Like, who are the people who are conducting this research? Who are the people collecting these documents? What documents do you need? What would be helpful in the initial meeting? Who's going to be present? Is it in person? Is it on Zoom? Like, what is the time period that you're going to need all of this information? I'm definitely a person where if I have all of the information up front, I can, like, govern myself accordingly. There's no way in the world that if I had known that just to do the educational testing, I was going to have to keep my house radio silent for 4.5 hours, that I would have agreed to do it in the manner that we did it.
Right.
So I think that those type of, like, knowledge is power. So the more I would have known up front, I would have been able to better prepare.
All right. That's I totally agree with that. That's a lot, because parents want to know, because I recently found out that Faith Evans' son has autism, and she has a foundation for him, and she was just saying how, hey, I thought I was just going to a parent meeting. I didn't know it was this. And I'm just like, oh, and it's like, wow, that's crazy, because it's like, as a educator, as a professional, like, you didn't have that conversation, like, you just doing it so casually.
And I mean, even like what I shared with you before we started. So my 2 older children are in DC public schools, and they both have been in charter schools since they started formal schooling at age 3. My youngest is actually in a school in Prince George's County in Maryland. And even there, the IEP process is significantly different, where in Maryland, the IEP process is streamlined. There is a different funding source, and everyone can contribute, but the person actually engaging in the IEP is a case manager that does not necessarily work at that school, who has a caseload of IEP clients that they go out and see in their school setting, and then contact the parents and work on the IEP, which was a completely different scenario. That might have also contributed to why for him the IEP process was not as stressful, because there was already a lot of data on what he had been doing in early interventions, and what the household was like, and who makes up the household, and things like that. Whereas when you're building it from the ground up and you are the person who's doing it, it can be very different, because you still have that timeline. So I would definitely say finding out what the process looks like. I'm going to say this too, just because my 2 older children have always been high achievers in school. Do not allow the narrative that because they are able to get good grades, that precludes them from getting SPED services.
Mm.
We delayed getting IEPs for both of those children because they were on honor roll. And we actually got questioned with the eldest about, well, if she's on honor roll, what can we possibly provide her? And I think my response was, that's what we're going to figure out in this process.
Mm.
Because
they have assumed, well, if they're doing so well academically, what else do we need? And it could be a social emotional aspect.
it could be a social emotional. And I mean, it was the same thing with her 504 plan. She hasn't gotten suspended. Why does she need a 504 plan? I said, have you ever had an OCD crisis in front of your peers? Because I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. It is very intense. It is very disorienting. It can be very overwhelming. There is a physical release that has to happen in order for you to process it, and then you are emotionally and physically exhausted, and you still have a whole work day. Like, you have a whole academic day left. How do you process that when it's something so public? So I think that's the other thing that where we really had to work on stigma and bias and understanding that what the resources are intended for. Because I think now my son is prepping for high school. My middle son is prepping for high school. And if I had known that he could have had SPED services earlier, and he should have had SPED services earlier, I would have worked on that IEP prior to middle school, and would not have allowed his grades and his matriculation to dictate whether or not he needed support.
Right. And I think also for people to understand that special education services is not just an academic thing. It's not just
It's not.
Nope. when I was still in the classroom, I had students who were gifted, but they had IEPs. Some of them had severe ADHD, or they had emotional disability, but they were gifted as well. So it's like, it's not a cookie cutter type situation where, oh, you have an academic problems, okay, here's the special education services. It's like, it's an array of services that your child can receive. It can be academic, it can be social emotional, it can be physical, you know what I mean? Your child may have a combination of all those things. It's not just one
size fits all. It's definitely not.
Right. So in your opinion, how can the special education process / the IEP process be improved? Because clearly there is room for improvement. What would you say from your perspective as the parent? Where could these improvements be with special education, period?
As like a parent and as a social worker, I feel like as a country, we should be assessing everyone. Like, education should not be viewed as one size fits all. Like, I think I'm just going to die at the top of that hill. I meet so many people who were never told that there are different styles of intelligence, that there are different styles of learning. They were labeled as something in the educational sphere, and they have operated under this assumption that meant that they were less than. They were less than intelligent. They would never be able to do fill in the blank on whatever their dream was. And I think that one of the things, if we really want to talk about educational disparity, especially as it pertains to people who are lower income, people who are in minority communities, there are a lot of things that you contend with when you are from communities that are not engaged in the educational process that affect your ability to obtain education. There is a lot of work that needs to be done around stigma and bias, especially in lower income communities and minority communities, as it pertains to differences in learning. It does not preclude you from learning. It does not mean that you cannot learn. It means that you have a diverse way of engaging information. And I think that if we just started reviewing IEPs like we as if it was a regular assessment that comes out every year when you have to enroll, you have several assessments. At least here, we have several assessments we have to do so we can figure out, well, which student can use this program, that program. If if we started out at least the initial information gathering for IEPs that way, I think it would do a lot to address some of that stigma and some of that bias. Because, for example, my husband is a kinetic learner. He probably has always been a kinetic learner, but because of the stigma and bias that was associated with SPED services when he was in school, his parents would not even consider getting him SPED services. And he struggled academically, although he could retain the information, he could explain the information, and normally was correct. But because he did not have the engagement around SPED services, not meaning that you were stupid or that you didn't try hard enough, it just meant that he had a different method of processing his environment and processing the information. And I think that when we really look at, like, there are several different intelligences, there are several different ways that you can engage around material. There, like, I am not a memorization person. Don't ask me to memorize it. I don't know. Like, I won't remember. But if you give me the materials, you let me chew on it for a little bit, I can tell you, I can get you to where you need to go. And it's one of those things that I had never considered. Like, in college for statistics, I couldn't write nothing, but I could tell you, so this is how you find a standard deviation, and this is what a standard deviation means. This is how you do it. So I had the information, I had the knowledge. It's just translating that knowledge into a way that made it make sense for me, and where it was obtainable. And I think that when we look at IEPs and 504s as a tool to make education obtainable, maybe we can kind of work on some of that stigma and that bias around parents not wanting to seek out these services for their kids. Because I've drummed into my kids that they were so unique and they were so amazing that I really want the world to know how to regard them. And this is one of the ways that we teach the world how to accept your uniqueness, how to process all of the amazing things that you're going to contribute to this world. This is not a detriment. This is how I was like, it's like an instruction manual. Whenever you get something new, you get an instruction manual so you know how to use it right. This is their instruction manual on how to engage you correctly.
Yeah, and I think that can also trickle over into just the educators and the staff that work with, the students that have special needs or students that have an IEP, because you have some, and they really, I want to say, if you work in a school district, it's a little different versus if you're in a charter school, because I want to say everyone may not have a background in special education. Even the person who's handling the special education don't have a background in special education. And then you also have those who have the back in the day mindset of special education. Because I can even remember one time being in a classroom and a teacher coming in like, he's special ed, he's supposed to be in here with you. And I'm just like, no, she didn't. And I definitely went to my principal like, you need to talk to your teachers. That was just the energy I had. You need to talk to you. Because like, why do you think that was okay to say? And like, first of all, even you don't even know the mindset that kids in to already maybe feel some type of way that they get special education services, and then you broadcast it. Who knows who was in the hallway? Who knows who was walking past? He could have felt some type of way, about that. And just to have a better understanding, like you said, this is what it is and this is what it is not. This is what we do. This is what we do not do. You know what I mean? And just changing the mindset of what special ed is, what it looks like, what special education services are. I'm really big on just explaining is difference. Everyone's different. Some students have severe needs, so they need a higher level of support. And I think everyone's mind goes there. And it's like, but no, you have some kids who, hey, they can make it in the classroom, but they need 2 teachers in the classroom, or they can make it in the classroom, but he needs counseling throughout his school day or throughout the week. Like, it's different. And then it's like, okay, you have certain services that you qualify for. Like, yes, hey, you can get testing accommodations. You can get state testing. You know what I mean? Just those things. And like some people, it's just immediately they go to your kid in class with a helmet riding a bus. You know what I mean? It's like their mind immediately goes to that. And it's like, no, that's not it. That is
It's not.
that is a aspect of it, but that's not the aspect.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. And I think that, if we shift the mindset about education, especially formal education in America, I think that, you know, even with teachers, like I've really come to this understanding that a lot of times they've been miseducated on what they can do, what they can't do, how they can do, how they can engage. So when I have conversations, even before they had IEPs, when I had conversations before, it was always about, so we are on this team because we got this scholar, and this scholar needs to learn these lessons before the end of the year. Here's how I can support you. Here's how my daughter, my son. Here's what motivates them. Here's how if they're having a bad day, this is how it manifests. This is how you contact me. And I made it very clear, especially at the beginning of the year and when we're doing mid-year check-ins. Like, you can contact me about my scholar at any time. Like, it does not have to just be, they have not done this, they have not done that. Even if it's hey, he came into class this day and he looked a little weird and he wasn't really talkative, if there's something going on. Because my goal has always been, so we're all people. Like, kids are people. They go through stuff, they experience stuff, and because they are children, they don't have the insight or the experience to understand that they can cope with this and they can talk about it, and there is support available. So I've always made it clear that if there is anything that you see, you wouldn't I'm trusting you as the expert in your classroom. If you see something that is impeding their ability to engage in your classroom, let me know. We can figure it out. We can talk it out. One teacher, I will never forget this. He was like, I think that notebooks might be intimidating for him. We found Post-it notes that were lined, and that was what he put his notes on in each subject. He had a Post-it note, and he would, title it this is how I divide fractions. And then there would be one whole Post-it note, a notepad size, of just how you divide fractions. So that when he was doing homework, he can post his note of what he took in class and then follow it while he was doing homework. And that was something that we had never even, I didn't know that there were lined Post-it notes or that there were Post-it notepads and things like that. But that was one of those things that came out of really ensuring that the lines of communication were open, and also reassuring the instructor that you don't have to just call me when things aren't going great. If you just have concerns, if you think that we can do things better, if you have found a resource that maybe might be helpful, you can always email me. We will always try to process it. We'll always try to figure it out with you. But we just have to know what's going on.
Okay. And last, this is what we're going to end with. So basically, this is the lesson learned. What do you wish you knew then that you know now?
As soon as I saw them struggling, I wish I had engaged with special education. As soon as there was an issue or a challenge, I wish I had engaged with special education services. And I wish that I had advocated for them to be evaluated. Like we said, I think there is a blind spot when the child is academically performing, to figure out what those challenges are. And I have been of the mindset for a while that school shouldn't hurt. You should not emotionally or physically feel hurt when you're engaging in school. So if there is a challenge, we need to figure out how we break that challenge down and how we address it. So I probably would have engaged them around special education services a lot earlier. It's one of the reasons why, although my son is in pre-K 3, he has an IEP, because the other two waited. And I feel like there were years where they really liked school. Well, they liked what they were doing, but school, they had mixed feelings about school, because they liked the lessons that they were learning, but it was so challenging that the experience was bittersweet. And I just don't feel like that's necessary. It's just not necessary to allow people to struggle. I think that that's one of my biggest takeaways is that as soon as you suspect something, as soon as something's happening, like I would run it by a pediatrician. Do you think that this is something that special education can address? Because if they say yes, I'm going to go and I'm going to advocate with the school for my kid. This is something that they are entitled to. This is something that will benefit them in the long run. And I mean, on a macro level, it also helps society remember that simply because someone presents as a spectrum of diversity, that does not preclude them from being valuable community members. It does not prevent them from positively contributing to their community.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie.
Yeah.
So I know you don't want to give any. Like, I know, don't follow me, but like if someone wanted to, just get maybe perhaps more information because you do work in the mental health field.
Yeah.
Is there any place you would like for them to come and view any information from you?
So I am on LinkedIn. I am Katie L. Fullwood, Katie with a D, Fullwood with one L. So that's F as in Frank, ULWOOD. And also, if you want to email me directly, it's my name, katie.fullwood@gmail.com.
All right. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
taking time out to just share your journey. We are greatly, greatly appreciative. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
All right. So I am Jamila, the IEP coach. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And at the IEP coach, we focus on helping principals keep their special education teachers from leaving the field. As you all know, and those of you who are new to the IEP coach, I'm a former special education teacher and special education supervisor. So I know what that life is like, and I know what that world is like. And I know there wasn't a lot of training for us. There wasn't a lot of professional development for us or coaching for us tailored to what we do in the field. So that's where I come in at to support principals with providing their special education teachers with the support that they need. Okay. Please follow us at the IEP Coach LLC on all platforms. That is Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as TikTok. Also, if you are watching this on a replay, just a reminder, please put #replay and make sure you tune in next Sunday for another episode of Their Voices Matter. Thank you so much and have an amazing day.